Hello, I'm Kate McLoughlin, Professor of English Literature at the University of Oxford, and I'm here again with Tom Hammick, painter and printmaker, at his studio in Bermondsey. And we're having this conversation as part of the Humanities cultural programme under the auspices of the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities. In today's conversation, we're discussing Tom's series Lunar Voyage, an amazing series of pictures exhibited at the Flowers Gallery in New York in 2017. And Lunar Voyage tells the moving story of a journey. An individual leaves his comfortable life on Earth to experience existence on another planet, only to find himself haunted by visions of what he's left behind. So in a sense, it's a classic story of exile, ancient story. In another sense, it's a strange and alien odyssey. So we're going to start by looking at the first picture in the series, which is called The Wanderer. And in this image, the would-be wanderer of the skies, the space voyager, is gazing at the stars through a telescope. So I know, Tom, you're a fan of the poems of Elizabeth Bishop, and this brings to my mind her poem The Man Moth, in which a man moth unsuccessfully tries to reach the moon. So as we're looking at your picture, I'd just like to quote some lines from that poem. So the man moth lives underground in a basement. It seems he lives in the basement of a building. And this is what Elizabeth Bishop writes. He does not see the moon. He observes only her vast properties, feeling the queer light on his hands, neither warm nor cold, of a temperature impossible to record in thermometers. So I wonder if you see your wanderer in similar terms. He inaugurates the series Lunar Voyage, but the moon's not visible in the picture. Can he see it? And how would you describe the light? Does Bishop's phrase "queer light" resonate with you? The lightest thing in the picture here seems to me to be his head, and I wonder if that's telling us something.
I think the head's his imagination, and his head and his tie. He's in his tails.
Right.
I think I see him as an old boy, me perhaps as an old boy. And he's looking up at the moon and the stars. What I've tried to do with this series is play around with time. So actually perhaps he's already been to the moon and he's looking back in time. Or perhaps he's just an armchair traveller. I mean, Bishop's poem of Genius, I think, is altogether... it's a very sad poem, don't you think?
I do, yeah.
I mean, it's desperate. And I think this has parallels to it, this series. It's also very sad, but I think it's full of rather more Boise kit. Right,
yeah. Here, his telescope.
Yeah, in this one, his telescope. But it's a very simple picture, and he's looking up at the stars, at something. And he's just called Wanderer, so he's this armchair wanderer, or he's wandering around the skies and he's dreaming and his imagination is full, and perhaps he's just looking back at his life.
And what was behind the decision not to include the moon in the picture? Because you have so many moons in your pictures.
Well, perhaps if the moon was in the picture as well, in all of them, it would be too illustrative. The moon, this is the first image in the series of 17. Perhaps the moon doesn't need to be there.
The night sky is absolutely glorious. I mean, you can see why it would either beckon him or induce in him feelings of regret that he's come down to earth.
There's not much going on. It's very flat. The colours of the field he's looking from is this sort of flat, dark emerald colour. I quite like this kind of strange puddle of dark around him. It's almost like a shadow, but it's...
Yes.
Or a bit like the shadow of the man moth, I don't know.
And he's very alone. I mean, we'll meet his family later on, I suppose, but
he's
at the
so
moment
alone.
It's just him.
He's kind of got his... It's almost like he's got his cavalry trousers on, or he's got his his morning suit trousers on.
He does look a bit moth-like with his tailcoat.
Yes.
So we have here Tom's incredible picture Lunography, which is a word of his own devising. A huge moon, a little tiny rocket floating past. In this image, the moon is huge, the rocket's very small. In other images which we're going to look at, it's the opposite kind of perspective with a huge rocket and a small moon. So the space seems endless, and the moon aside, very empty. So in her introductory essay to the Lunar Voyage exhibition, Hannah Hughes, who's another artist, writes that you've conjured the palpable monastic silence of space. And I wondered first what you thought of that phrase as a description of what you're portraying. Do you see space as monastic? And if so, would that be a positive or a negative thing for you?
In a way, it's monastic in the sense that we know from the experiences of astronauts and from films and poems and stories about space travel that a lot of people who go up to the moon, it's very contemplative, and they see that there's nowhere to go really, and they just want to go back to the blue planet.
Yes.
And it creates distance, and in creating distance, like having a monastic life, you have room and space and time to contemplate where you've been, where you're going, love and loss, all your experiences in your life, looking back at your life and so on. So yes, I think the whole process of going to the moon, going out into space, when one's not completely preoccupied with the kit going wrong that you're in, and you know, being in a vacuum and all those dangers, because it's very dangerous.
So tell us about your moon. It's incredibly detailed. I can see there's a geodesic dome on it, which is presumably where the Lunar Voyager lives when he's on the moon. But what else is going on in this incredible moonscape?
It's an old Phillips atlas of the moon from the 70s. It's full of all the Latin names of features of the moon, craters and mountains. But I also put all the places I've ever lived on here amongst it. I think I've lived in about 22 places in my life, properly for more than 6 months. And so I have Chocolate Lake, which is in Canada, Talbot Terrace, where I lived in Lewis with my family, and the places where I'm born, Mundania Road, which is where I live now, Melwood Avenue in Canada, West Beam, which is where we lived in Sussex, and so on and so forth. Or the Yellow Sands, which is the place we went to in Devon when I was a child from the age of about 3 to 19, which I still adore, and so on and so forth. And of course, I'm very interested in this whole idea of home and where is home and whether it's possible even to have a home. And I thought that our wanderer who looked up on his telescope, he perhaps doesn't realise that perhaps he's already been there. Or it's a sort of existential journey or an existential understanding that he's been there before, or he's thought about being there. And perhaps he's looking up at where he's already been. So I sort of play around with time. And you get these feelings in the Odyssey. I think the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, was very much the book I was really thinking about. I just read a brilliant new translation by Wilson, and it was the first sort of big female translation of and it was published by Princeton, and I think it's a work of genius. Yes. And it has wonderful poetry to it from a female perspective.
And I want to talk about the Odyssey and Odysseus later on, particularly when we get onto the pictures of coming home. Although the moon is not the alien place I was expecting, because it is very much imprinted with ideas of home, and it's a question of where you feel at home, and also who you feel you're with in such places. So I wanted to read some lines by the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, who was a Jesuit priest. And Hopkins is known for his incredibly rich, detailed observations of nature. And he really does for trees and birds and winding rivers what you've done for the moon's surface in this picture. There's a famous poem by him called A Starlight Night. And he says to the reader, look at the stars, look up at the skies, oh, look at all the fire folk sitting in the air, the bright boroughs, the circle citadels there. And the picture of the wanderer with all those gorgeous stars in the sky very much reminds me of that, the fire folk sitting in the air. And in that poem, his sky is teeming as it is in the wanderer. But another poem he wrote, a less well-known poem he wrote called Nondum, which means not yet. And he wrote it when he was an Oxford undergraduate, and he was thinking about becoming a Roman Catholic, has a very different outlook. So it's not teeming with wonderful fire folk, but it's almost empty. So I'll just read this to you. This is Nondum. God, though to thee our psalm we raise, no answering voice comes from the skies. To thee the trembling sinner prays, but no forgiving voice replies. Our prayer seems lost in desert ways, our hymn in the vast silence dies. So I'm going to ask you a deep question now about God and your idea of space. Is there a God there, or is it empty?
I think there's a God there, yes. I can't... Every astronaut who went up and has gone up to space and who looked back at our blue dot has come back in wonder, really. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to be on firm ground. And I think I feel this about being alive for this tiny bit that I'm alive very much. I feel that we have heaven on earth, and it is miraculous. And Carl Sagan, I mean, that very famous quote about, you know, there's that blue dot, everyone who ever lived, everyone who ever loved, every despot, whoever lived there on that mote of moon dust or whatever, caught in a sunbeam or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he gets Voyager 2 to turn around, that it's however many billion miles away, to catch this tiny half a pixel in this range of pixels all across. And it is quite miraculous that we have this tiny dot in the middle. We are in this corner of the universe, and it's extraordinary that we're allowed to be here. So I think there's something going on for sure.
So you think the guy in here, there's somebody with him? He's not completely alone? He seems very alone in this vastness.
He's very alone in a way. It's kind of a play. It's almost like a sort of an egg, you know, and
yes.
the fertilization of an egg.
Right.
But he's pretty alone in his existential journey. But I think behind it all, I mean, we're all alone, but behind it all, there's this feeling. I mean, you know, another poet we both like, Louis MacNeice, you know, describes the earth so well in it being incorrigibly plural, you know.
Yes.
I peel and spit
yes.
the tangerine, or the tangerine and spit the pits, and, you know, things are various.
And actually, having heard you talk about the moon and realising that your places of home are on the moon, he seems a lot less alone now. He seems quite near.
Yeah, but in the other way, I'm just playing games. You know, I'm not playing games, but I'm making up something that can be interpreted, I hope, in lots of different ways. And I'm having such fun with scale and looking back at the 70s and images from, you know, 2001: Space Odyssey, from The Man Who Fell to Earth, from the whole series has kind of rather boy's own connections to films that I loved as a child. So, Kate, this is image number 3 or 4 in the series, and it's called Cloud Island. And you asked me about whether I believe in God or something behind everything. And I suppose on this one, I've made a print of a sort of prelapse area in Eden, of Eden, or this beautiful island with things growing on it and a house. It almost looks like a Chinese scroll painting from a long time ago, and the domestic is happening, but even here there are connections to later imagery in the series. So you have you know, mum and children working, and there's this lovely island full of trees and a lobster pot boat, and a man sort of taking it off its moorings and about to go off to his rocket. And then there's the moon there and a sort of canopy of stars and constellations above him. So I suppose what I was doing was saying, well, why on earth would anyone want to leave? It's a bit like Richard Branson building his Virgin rocket. Why? Yes. We've got it all here.
This boat, though, seems very attractive in its sort of peachiness and the red line here. I mean, you could see why you might want to get into this boat and go off to that rocket, and the moon looks very inviting as well. Whereas this looks a bit prison-like, I have to say. This is home, but I mean,
I love I love islands, and I love the Western Isles, and I off Nova Scotia and off Maine, and I go and stay with friends in Maine sometimes when I can, and in the past, and they are these sort of perfect little micro worlds.
And you can see, again, the lush vegetation, I mean, reminding you of the kind of lushness of the imagination, I suppose. So you can see how he's been inspired to, you know, set off for pastures new.
For sure. Or you think he's an idiot to set off for pastures new, when actually all the beauty and everything and shelter and warmth is at home. I think the fourth image in the sequence of 17 is called Wake. It's about 6 foot high, and you got this, it's a sort of I was great love of Tintin, Hergé. There's fantastic drawings. So here's the wanderer in his lobster pot boat getting closer to his rocket, and he's about to take off. It's a bit like a sort of James Bond film, getting near Blofeld's lair, but it's also very much stealing, I think, from a Tintin cover, Journey to the Moon, or there's a wonderful one of a ship, or no, a little boat going out in the water. I like the title, Wake, the wake of the boat, and the fact that it's his own wake, really. Yeah, and this dark candle that's about to be lit.
Yeah, and as ever, the gorgeous appeal of the moon.
Tangerine moon.
Who could resist that?
Like a Chinese lantern.
Exactly. So we're now looking at 3 versions of a picture called Journey to the Moon. But first of all, Tom, tell me about the colour choices going on in these 3 different versions.
I get very bored of making an edition where every print's the same, it's the same matrix. So it's nice pushing them in different directions. There are actually, this is an edition of 12, I think, and there are actually 4 blue ones, 4 yellow ones, 4 red ones, and 4 green ones with green skies.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. I want to push them in different places, and also they have very different atmospheres. So here we have a kind of dusk launch.
Yes.
Here we have a sort of early morning launch.
Yeah.
This launch is more metaphorical as a sort of like the lovely Gauguin painting of the angel or archangel Gabriel, I think, fighting with the devil with a red sky, or it becomes quite biblical.
The blaze of noon, it seems to me. But
Yeah.
yeah.
I kind of wanted to talk to you also about noise,
Yes.
because I was very much thinking, you know, they had to use so much for the Saturn rockets. They had to use so much, and they still do, of course, so much propellant to get up this tiny few tons up into the sky, into space. And so I wanted to sort of show not only this combustion of turning, you know, all this energy into motion, but the noise that it made through colour.
Yeah. So this image is called Starpath, and I think we can see the firefolk sitting in the air here. And we've got a very different vapour trail. Could you tell us about the palette of this picture?
We did have this as orange and red, this vapour trail, and it was too hot, it was too loud. I wanted to associate this image with his guilt, in a way, this traveller's guilt. We experimented a lot with this image, and sometimes the flumes were very bright, and we got to the point where we had to have them very cold.
Yeah.
So you've got these greens and pale yellows, and it's like he's sneaking off and leaving Earth and going all towards lunacy, towards the moon, as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think also I wanted it to be almost like in Milton, the sort of devil going around, floating around the Earth, smelling the Earth. But here...
Yes. So in the sense of the wanderer is smelling the moon, or relating back to the Earth?
I think the wanderer has been going, you know, to get into orbit. He's gone round the Earth to catapult himself.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know remember all those wonderful drawings at the time in the 70s of slingshots. So, you know, here you have Earth, and here you have the moon, and to get speed around to get out, you go around the Earth several times, and then you you go around the moon and then you land and then you do the same
Right.
back.
Okay.
Do you see?
Yeah, beautiful.
And you come into
Yeah.
So I think I wanted to have this sort of thing going on, but it's very clunky because you've got this great big piece of kit in the middle.
And when in Paradise Lost Satan goes to Earth, the Earth's just been created, and everyone's going to sort of see, have a look and see what this new thing is. And he does that thing of sort of approaching it, sort of flying around it and then landing and then approaching the Garden of Eden and sitting. I think Milton says he sits like a cormorant, and then he smells how wonderful Eden is. So it's more it's an olfactory kind of sense before it's a visual sense. And here it's a very visual sense, obviously. But I love the sense of this kind of quiet voyage. I think you're absolutely right about the coolness of the colours. You get the sense of it steaming out because there's a sort of fuzziness in between the green and the yellow, but this gorgeous sort of sense of, it's almost sort of swimming in waters. It's more like a ship. Well, it is a spaceship, isn't it? It's a ship in kind of heavenly waters. And there's Cloud Island back home, and here's the moon, and incredibly appealing, this rocky place. And here's this wanderer who may or may not be a good person, who's going off in his rocket, Satan-like, kind of circling the heavenly bodies. Yeah, it's extraordinary.
But I quite like the way that we cut out this piece of wood. It's a very different piece of wood from this.
Yes.
So to create this almost like arrow-like thing swimming through the space.
Yes. Well, here's a silent language going on, because in all the pictures we've looked at, and we haven't really commented on this, there's this groundedness in wood, that organic sense of it's wood. There's the grain of the wood, always, even when we're in outer space.
And there was another thing I wanted. We didn't ink up the plates too much. We wanted to see the wood grain. We could have really gone over the top with the wood grain, and we didn't. And that was partly also because I wanted it to allude to static. Do you remember when we were younger and you turn the telly off, or telly would stop at sort of 11:30 or 12, and then it was, and after the test card, you go, and you just have this wonderful static.
Disappeared into a dot.
And in all those films and things, you have people trying to talk to each other over vast distances. And when you hear the recordings of the lunar landings where Armstrong's landing on the moon, and he's literally got 17 seconds of fuel left, and he's flying this weird sort of sack of potatoes, and he's trying to get, and of course the static is extraordinary. You can hardly hear what he's saying, and that creates, I think, that feeling of space and distance and the speed of light.
Totally. And having Cloud Island the wrong way round over there in the corner does that.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to do that because actually everything's totally discombobulating. Everything's upside down and inside out, and you're spinning around. Another large woodcut is called Sky Atlas. Here I wanted it to almost be like a map, but also like a target or a gun sight where, rather like the sort of gods on Mount Olympus, they're looking down at us mortals and they know exactly what we're going to be doing next. So here, the wanderer, the traveller, the astronaut, the Odysseus is flying his tin can and getting closer to the moon. And the house and family is really receding. It's gone monotone. And suddenly the moon is the thing that's becoming colourful, is towards his destination. And you've got this rather nice sort of energy coming out of here, almost like sort of a bat, the way it's coming out this thing. And these are the sections of his rocket falling away. It's tumbling down, falling away in space, going that way. So in Flyby, our traveller is very close to the moon. Mm-hmm. He's circling the moon, so it's the other end of the slingshot. And I like, it was fun making this cabin with all the lights on, like sweeties everywhere. It's his temporary home, and it's, it's very artificial and it's not sustainable, but it's lit up like a Christmas tree. And actually it's based on images of the shuttle, not the Apollo module. And here we got the static we were talking about, like noise,
right,
going across the screen, which I hope creates a sense of these sound waves and electrical waves, and also the kind of magnetic field that comes out of the sun going across our solar system.
And do you do that with the grain of the wood? Is that how
Yeah.
you create it?
So we would often choose the wood at the wood yard for the image. And then here we're actually using laser cutters here to create this lovely, beautiful moon, and it's pale blue printed on silver. Here we have pitch. Our wanderer has landed, but it's taken from that very famous moonrise, or Earthrise, sorry, I should say, Earthrise photograph from, I think, was it Apollo 11? I'm not sure, but it's the Apollo mission that didn't actually land on the moon, but went around the moon. And it was the first time they went around the dark side of the moon and came out, and that was very exciting. And of course, it's a great image for our planet and the environment. You know, our blue pebble of life, and the austerity and dryness and rockiness, and deadness of the moon. I was also looking at Patrick Caulfield, who's an artist I much admire, and his colours. And I wanted this to be like a great big light bulb. You know, you don't quite know what's going on in here. It's like looking into someone's head. And I quite like puns in my titles sometimes. You know, the pitching of a spaceship, and the pitching of a tent, and, you know, riding his luck. In chamber, we're inside the dome, and everything's unfurling, really. I imagine it as sort of lunacy. It's linked to quite a lot of films. Her dress is actually taken from the pattern of the carpet in The Shining. This pattern is taken from the walls of the spaceship in Alien. I wanted her to be almost like on a trapdoor looking down at Earth, and you don't know whether this person's coming or going, or whether she's just a figment of his imagination, very much like in Nicholas Roeg's A Man Who Fell to Earth. And in that film, the Martian character, as played by David Bowie, is having dreams of his family back on another planet, and they're dying of thirst. And here I've got the family down on Earth, and this is of course a picture later on in the series of them looking up at him.
So that's a brilliant kind of confusing of time and space. You don't know in what order things are happening and where people are meant to be, and is he still in his rocket here, and here's the Earth, but somehow it's there. And
yeah, and this of course happens, doesn't it, when in that thing when we're waking up from sleep and hit that hypnagogic period where we're just coming out of sleep and things are very jumbled up and we're half in reality and half still in our dreams, our subconscious.
And a time of great imagination as well.
So it's a time of great imagination. It's the best time, isn't it, really? Here we have Sleeper. He's having visions of home and the past and the future. And he's also kind of dreaming in that hypnagogic state of home here. And he's in his pod, and it's time to go home. This sequence then takes a different turn of events, really. In the image terrestrial, we have a family, almost like a refugee family, going towards the sea in this wood, looking up at the moon. We have a precursor of it when, on the moon, he's looking back at this image. But here, it's vast and simple and sort of very austere and quite sad. You know, and you wonder, I mean, all the figures are in this sort of Rucken figure where you look at the figure from behind, but you also wonder where he might be. So he's sort of abandoned them to go on his ridiculous journey. You know, I was thinking very much of Odysseus in the Odyssey and leaving Telemachus behind and Penelope and all his family, and also things closer to home.
So let's talk about these. We've got 4 images in front of us. So we've got terrestrial, nightfall. Terrestrial we have here.
Yeah.
Nightfall is, again, he's coming home in a blaze of glory, but the family are looking in the opposite direction.
Yeah, well, the family aren't really noticing. They've kind of moved on. What I was trying to do in the clothes that they're all wearing is trying to get to a particular sort of characterization of each person in the family. Mum wears a sort of heels fabric. There's this rather nice camouflage suit. There's Shepherd Fairey and his wonderful top that Obama used in his campaign. And then you've got one of the children wearing a sort of Missoni jumpsuit from the 70s, as if she's dancing at Studio 54 in New York.
And so in the next one, he's landing.
He's landing, he's trying to get home. This reminds me of my childhood of sort of films and comics, and he's pointing his spaceship, which is, I think, flying on vapor trails, on fumes, trying to get it back to the island.
And he looks as though he might crash into the sea.
Yeah. And
then finally we have here Garden.
And he's come back younger, and it's his shadow. But I was thinking a lot about Cheever, his great short story, The Swimmer. And that's a short story about madness and reality and unreality, and him misreading everything. And as a reader, you misread everything. You're behind the time, so you wonder why he's going from swimming pool to swimming pool and having dry martinis, and everyone's slightly weird with him, and it gets weirder. And you suddenly realise that his family's abandoned him, or he's abandoned his family, and when he ends up at the house, it's all boarded up. I've very much done that here, whereas the house is boarded up and covered in creepers.
So I wanted to talk about Homecoming, and you mentioned the Odyssey. I know Lunar Voyage is just saturated with illusions and influences, and it's quite extraordinary from that respect. And one of them, as it were, the kind of governing narrative is Homer's Odyssey. And that is a story about somebody who's trying to get home, someone who's been away from home for 20 years, and he spends 10 of them fighting in a war and 10 of them trying to get home. And darn it, as soon as he gets home, after going through all these obstacles, he doesn't stay very long. He's off almost immediately. And you think, but that's what you wanted. You wanted to get home. And here's the version of that moment, of that. He's back home, but again, it's not enough. It's from his Tennyson's poem Ulysses, which he wrote when he was 24, about 3 weeks after his great friend Arthur Hallam died. Hallam was 22 at the time. So it was a strange, I think, poem to write, because it was about a young man who'd died far too soon. And this poem's about almost an old man who's lived too long. And this is a bit from Tennyson's Ulysses, which you probably know very well. I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untravelled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one, to me, little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things, and vile it were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself, and this grey spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. And that image of following knowledge like a sinking star, it's always going beyond the horizon, resonates for me with your images here. And I just wondered how you react to those lines of this guy who has gone off to the moon, or maybe going off to the moon. Here he is at home. He's realised that home was with him all the time. Will he stay home now he's home, or will he go off again?
Well, he'll definitely stay, I think, but the trouble is home has moved away from him. He's lost it, in a way. I mean, there are 2 or more images in the series which I'll show you quickly, and that will kind of perhaps help answer that question. But I think he's desperate to be at home.
And it's true of Odysseus. When he gets back to Ithaca, he's dropped on the shore, and he wakes up and he's no idea where he is. And so it should be incredibly familiar to him. And in fact, he feels like a stranger.
Well, he does, but it's not surprising he feels like a stranger. But he does this weird thing. There's just a couple of lines about it. You know, he literally has to plant. You know, there's this great symbol of the ore of his travels, and then he plants the ore. And he always turns it into a tool for bashing out wheat. And he plants it literally in the center of the island. So suddenly this kind of metaphor for his journeying and his insatiable appetite for adventure and womanizing and fighting and sex and everything else, he kind of lays it to rest, which is very, very poignant, I think. Here we have living room, and this was me imagining the journeyman, the Odyssean character, coming back home and walking into his living room. And he sees images of his journey. He even sees his spaceship coming back to Earth. And you even get a sort of copy of one of my sketchbooks of me trying to work out how to make the thing. So I'm sort of kneading everything into each other. And then all the pillows on the sofa have got things. So here's like the shepherd fairy detail of a t-shirt one of his children's wearing. Here you've got the rocket going off. Here you've got members of the family painted on a wall, sort of ping pong bats. You've got the mirror showing sort of blank, dead room. And then pictures of his life away and family. And then photographs, but done as woodcuts on the wall, as is. But no one there to greet him. So I wanted this, in a sense, this incredibly colourful image that's full of hope, but actually it's not really. It's canned death almost. There's no one there.
So we're now looking at Blackout, which is the concluding image of Lunar Voyage. And you could be forgiven if you're looking at this picture on the internet or from afar of thinking it's completely black. But in fact, there's incredible dark blues. There's a geodesic dome. There's the Wanderer. There's the night sky. So it begs the questions, where is the Wanderer? Is he still on the moon? Has he come home? Is he going to go to the moon? What's his relationship with what's around him? The mood is quite sombre and downcast, and it very much contrasts, as far as I'm concerned, with the wonderful sort of aspirational curiosity of the first image when he's got his telescope and he's looking up at all the fireflakes sitting in the air, the stars in the sky. So I wanted to finish by reading some lines from Edward Young's long poem, Night Thoughts, which was published between 1742 1745, a long time before space rockets were invented. And Young very much enjoyed the nighttime and was inspired by it, but also experienced great feelings of desolation. And so I was going to read some lines from it which evoke the night. Night, sable goddess, from her ebon throne, in rayless majesty, now stretches forth her leaden sceptre o'er a slumbering world. Silence, how dead, and darkness, how profound, nor eye nor listening ear an object finds. Creation sleeps. 'Tis as the general pulse of life stood still, and nature made a pause, an awful pause, prophetic of her end. And let her prophecy be soon fulfilled. Fate, drop the curtain. I can lose no more. So, Blackout seems to me to epitomise solitude, the figure's distance from his dome, from the earth, from his family, from the rest of the universe, it seems. So I wondered what you make of solitude. I mean, we've talked about this before, but whether it's your hope that the absence of noise, the busyness, the colour in pictures such as Blackout makes us sort of turn inwards and pay attention to what's going on in our minds, whether there's a kind of hope in self-sufficiency here. There's a lonely figure, but is he entirely hopeless?
I'm very frightened about solitude a lot of the time. I saw this figure as not entirely hopeless. No, I saw him as carrying on drawing. In one sense, and I haven't mentioned this yet, this whole series of images is about what one has to do as an artist, as a writer, as a poet, as a painter, as a composer. You know, you have to work all the time, but other people have to suffer, or often do suffer in that, you know, the highs and the lows. I think a lot of, there was a wonderful program by his son about Jonathan Miller, and, you know, his son was saying that the whole family had to suffer for his darknesses, even though he had this most extraordinary brain.
Yeah.
I think as a painter, you know, I know very much that my family's had to suffer. Even although we've had good times, we were broke a lot of the time, and it was incessant. I'd carry on working, even when the chips were down and nothing was selling. But you just had to. It's a sort of a fix, and you just had to do it. So I see I see this in one sense. It's Blackout partly because it's like the curtain coming down at the end of something, you know, the theatre or a life. But also he has to go back to carry on doing what he's doing. But you know, the fire and the hearth, it's not warm. And nothing's. He's on his own. He's on his Todd, but he keeps going.
I think that's a really beautiful reflection, and it resonates with me because it's the same with being an academic. It's a vocation, and I understand what you say about it involves loss and other people have to bear the brunt of it. And I suppose at least you can say that it lets you go to the moon.
It does, but you know, one's full of guilt and shame for what this does to people and the ones that you love, and who also enable you to be free to do it. So there's this awful secret paradox in it. I mean, of course, it's written about, it's known about, and it's a well-trodden thing, but it's true nevertheless. I mean, if you are trying to make something out of nothing, then other people on your way to sustain you so they can keep you alive and you can keep alive, and otherwise, you know, half the time one just wants to feed oneself. So I feel quite guilty and ashamed about that other people on this have but have often sacrificed things.
And is there any tiny consolation in the beauty that you've created?
It's annoying, I think, and it'd be nice to be able to do it without that. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult. We're also talking about here gender, I think, and I think if you have children, it's tough to do both. And I mean, what you do is bring 3, 2, 1, however many children you have, art objects into the world that are kinetic and real. But it is, and also you have, as long as you get through that, you know, look at these great writers now who, you know, look at Alice Munro, look at Rachel Cusk, look at all sorts of people who are writing who have now been through difficult times bringing up families and then having copy and extraordinary things and depths to write about, you know, and Tyler, all sorts, you know, the list is endless. But it's you've got to get to that point, and you've got to hope for a long life.
Thanks, Tom.
That's okay.